The night he found them began with the sound of rain hammering the tin roof like a warning, the kind of rain that feels heavy with fate, and a single father standing in a grocery store parking lot realized that his quiet, carefully managed loneliness was about to be shattered forever when he saw a widow and 4 exhausted children huddled beside a broken-down car, their lives unraveling in the cold glow of flickering streetlights. Before the story goes any further, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to channel name if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that happen when ordinary people choose compassion. He had not planned to stop that night. His mind was already full, weighed down by unpaid bills folded neatly in his jacket pocket, a long shift that had left his back aching, and the familiar ache of returning to a house that felt too quiet since his wife's passing. Being a single dad had taught him discipline and endurance, but it had also carved deep grooves of solitude into his days. He moved through life on a schedule, grocery runs after work, quick dinners, laundry done late at night, and early mornings that began with responsibility instead of hope. When he noticed the children first, their small shapes pressed close together for warmth, something in him stirred that he had learned to silence for survival. The widow stood near them, her posture rigid, as if holding herself upright was the last defense she had left against collapse. Her eyes carried the hollow look of someone who had already asked for help too many times and been turned away. She had lost her husband months earlier, not to something dramatic, but to a sudden illness that gave no warning and no mercy. Since then, life had unraveled in slow, humiliating ways. Family members who had promised support had grown distant, uncomfortable with the weight of grief and responsibility. Offers to help became excuses, and excuses turned into silence. The small inheritance had vanished under medical bills and rent, and pride had kept her from asking strangers for help until there was no other choice. That night, her car had finally given out, leaving her and her children stranded with nowhere left to go. She had packed their lives into that car, believing movement was better than stillness, believing that as long as they were driving, they were not yet defeated. The single dad watched from a distance at first, wrestling with himself. He knew the cost of opening his door to others. He knew how fragile his own stability was, how one unexpected expense or emotional burden could tip his life into chaos. But he also knew the look in those children's eyes, the same look his own child had worn after losing a parent, the quiet fear that settles in when the world stops making sense. The rain continued to fall, blurring the lines between caution and courage, until he found himself walking toward them, driven less by logic than by a pull he could not explain. Bringing them home was not a heroic gesture, it was awkward, uncertain, and filled with doubt. His house was small, modest, and carefully arranged to fit his routines. Suddenly it was crowded with damp shoes by the door, borrowed blankets spread across the floor, and the soft, exhausted breathing of children who fell asleep before fear could catch up with them again. The widow apologized with her eyes, shrinking herself as if she were taking up too much space simply by existing. He felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders the moment he turned the lock, realizing that he could not undo what he had done, and strangely, he did not want to. The days that followed were harder than he expected. Groceries disappeared faster than his paycheck could replenish them. Mornings became chaotic, with school schedules overlapping and bathrooms always occupied. The widow struggled with guilt, her grief resurfacing in waves that left her distant and withdrawn, while the children carried their own quiet burdens. They flinched at raised voices, hoarded food without realizing it, and clung to small routines as if they were lifelines. The single dad found himself stretched thin, snapping at minor inconveniences, then hating himself for it. He wondered late at night if he had made a mistake, if compassion had crossed into recklessness. Yet something subtle began to change within those walls. The house, once silent and heavy with memory, filled with movement and sound. Laughter erupted unexpectedly, often at the simplest things, like a shared joke over dinner or a clumsy attempt at a board game. The widow, slowly and cautiously, began to re-emerge from her grief, helping around the house, insisting on contributing in any way she could. She took on tasks that gave her purpose again, cooking meals that reminded her children of better times, organizing the small chaos of shared living. The children began to relax, their shoulders lowering, their eyes brighter, their trust returning in fragments. For the single dad, the transformation was unexpected and unsettling. He had believed his life was defined by loss, that his role was to endure quietly and provide without complaint. Instead, he found himself laughing more than he had in years, his evenings no longer swallowed by loneliness but filled with shared stories and simple rituals. The responsibility was still there, heavy and constant, but it was now paired with something he had not felt since his wife's death: meaning. The widow and her children were not a burden, they were a mirror, reflecting back parts of himself he had forgotten existed. Challenges did not disappear, and the world did not suddenly become kind. There were tense conversations about finances, moments when tempers flared, and nights when anxiety pressed down on everyone in the house. Extended family members questioned his decision, warning him that he was being taken advantage of, that he was risking everything for people who were not his responsibility. Those words planted seeds of doubt that grew in the quiet moments when exhaustion stripped away his optimism. He worried about what would happen if he lost his job, if the arrangement fell apart, if kindness proved too costly. But then there were the small moments, the kind that do not make headlines but change lives. A child leaving a handmade note on the kitchen counter thanking him for breakfast. The widow standing a little taller after securing part-time work, her confidence slowly rebuilding. The way the house felt warmer, not because of the heater, but because it was filled with people who cared if the lights were on or off, who noticed when someone was quiet, who showed up for each other without being asked. These moments stitched together something fragile but real, a sense of family born not of blood, but of choice. Over time, the children began to call his house home without hesitation. They invited friends over, decorated their shared spaces, and planned futures that included stability rather than survival. The widow saved what she could, determined to stand on her own again, but she also allowed herself to accept help without shame. The single dad learned that strength did not mean carrying everything alone, it meant letting others carry parts of the weight with him. He began to understand that his grief had not ended his story, but had prepared him to recognize pain in others and respond with empathy rather than fear. What he did not realize, not until much later, was that they had become his daily miracle. He had believed he was rescuing them from the cold, from abandonment, from a world that had turned its back. In truth, they were rescuing him from a life narrowed by loss, from the slow erosion of hope that comes with isolation. Each morning he woke to the sound of life filling his home, and each night he went to bed knowing that his kindness had created something lasting and profound. As the seasons changed, so did their circumstances. The widow found steadier work, the children thrived in school, and the household settled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. There were still struggles, still moments of fear about the future, but they faced them together. The single dad no longer measured his success by how much he could endure alone, but by how much love and stability he could help build. He saw clearly now that miracles were not sudden or spectacular, they were built slowly, through consistency, patience, and the courage to care when it would be easier to walk away. If this story has touched your heart so far, stay with it, because the ending is not about perfection, but about the quiet power of human connection. Before the final moments, take a second to comment below and share what kindness means to you or how someone once changed your life when you needed it most. Near the end of that year, as the family gathered around a modest celebration, the single dad looked around his once empty home and felt something close to awe. The walls had not changed, the furniture was still worn, and the future was still uncertain, but the space was alive in a way it had never been before. He understood then that love does not always arrive wrapped in joy, sometimes it comes disguised as responsibility, inconvenience, and risk. And sometimes, the people we help become the very ones who save us. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that goodness still exists in the world, please like, share, and subscribe to channel name. Your engagement helps stories like this reach others who might need hope today.